rise in the latest Absa PMI data. What does that tell us about what's happening in the manufacturing sector?
Thanks, Stephen. Indeed, there has been that rise in the Absa Purchasing Managers Index, showing a hike to 54.8 points, representing a 4.1 point increase in the month of May. Economist at Absa, Miyelani Maluleke, joins us now to elaborate on this data. Thank you, as always, for your time, Miyelani. Let's first go through the contributing factors this time around. Of course, the KZN floods have had an impact.
Absolutely, but I think we'll remember that the biggest impact really of the devastating floods was in April, and we saw that when the PMI fell quite sharply from about 60 in March to just about 50 in April. And what we're seeing in the latest data for May is that it does look like we were able to recover some of those losses, but the recovery does seem to have been held back a little bit. We think there were some lingering factors from the floods, with some businesses probably still not able to get back to full production. I think the continued load shedding that we're experiencing is certainly a big constraint for a lot of businesses. But the 2-week strike that we also had in one of the major steel manufacturing firms, I think all of those factors constrain the recovery, and which is why when we look at the PMI data for May, yes, better than April when we had the worst of the floods, but still not quite as strong as what we saw in March.
And given those contributing factors, is this what the market expected, and how has the reading been welcomed overall?
Yeah, look, I think, there's been a lot of concern around growth, not just domestically, but also internationally, given, of course, the ongoing war in Ukraine, some of the hard lockdown measures that we've seen out of China, concerns about rising inflationary pressures and the tightening that we're seeing coming through from some of the major central banks around the world. So expectations around growth have not been particularly strong over the last little while. So I think in that context, seeing this pick up in the manufacturing sector domestically, it certainly is something that's been welcomed by the market.
Now, let's also talk about what the data is saying about the status of the manufacturing sector, of course, given global as well as domestic concerns.
Yeah. Look, I think, we had a really strong recovery, of course, from the worst of COVID. The international environment, I think, has been very strongly supportive to that. But there's also been some underlying resilience of this economy that I think we've seen over the last couple of years. But I think going forward, we are confident that, given the kind of demand conditions that we are seeing domestically, given the kind of demand conditions that we're still seeing externally, I mean, if you look at new export orders, those were still fairly strong in May. We're still confident that the domestic manufacturing sector can continue to pick up going forward. But there are risks here that we need to be mindful of domestically and internationally. And I think domestically, the one big risk that we continue to be concerned about is electricity supply. I mean, Eskom has been frank enough to say that its systems remains highly vulnerable. There's always a risk that load shedding may have to be escalated, etc. And I think that would be a big blow to a lot of businesses. But internationally, I think one of the big risks that we're also watching right now is that because of these inflationary pressures that we've been seeing globally, some of the major central banks have had to come through, start to tighten. We've seen the Fed already tightening by 50 basis points. There is an expectation that we could see a lot more of these hikes going forward as central banks try to tame these inflationary pressures. But the cost of taming these inflationary pressures could be weaker global growth, and that is something that will also come back to hurt domestic manufacturers. So we're watching these risks, but so far, we're still confident that at least over the near term, demand conditions are still strong enough to give us a little bit of continued recovery momentum.
We'll leave it there with Absa economist Miyelani Maluleke talking through us the developments in the manufacturing sector.